We don't need to do charity for you anymore, old woman. Go die in a nursing home where you belong. Those were the words my daughter-in-law Sophia screamed at me from my own bedroom window as she threw my belongings onto the front lawn. My mother's china teacup, the one that survived the Great Depression, shattered on the concrete. George's reading glasses landed in the mud. My wedding album hit the ground and burst open. 43 years of memories scattering in the morning wind. And my son Nathan, my only child, the boy I'd raised with every ounce of love in my heart, stood behind her in silence, watching his mother be discarded like trash. All because of a lottery ticket worth $85 million that they believed was theirs. I'm Eleanor Hayes, 63 years old, and I need to tell you this story because I spent 7 years of my life sacrificing everything for people who saw me as nothing more than a burden to be tolerated. That Tuesday morning, standing on the lawn of the home my late husband and I had worked our entire lives to own, watching my life rain down around me, I finally understood the difference between being loved and being useful. But let me take you back to where this really began, because betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It grows slowly, quietly, in the small moments you convince yourself don't matter. George and I built our life in Charleston, South Carolina, brick by patient brick over 4 decades. He was a postal worker for 37 years, walking the same routes in blazing summer heat and freezing winter rain. I taught 2nd grade at Madison Elementary for 32 years, shaping young minds and wiping runny noses and spending my own money on classroom supplies because I believed in giving children the best start possible. We weren't wealthy people. We never took fancy vacations or drove new cars. But we had something worth more than money. We had a home filled with love, a marriage built on respect, and dreams we'd saved for all our lives. Our house was a modest 2-story with white shutters and a porch swing George built with his own hands during our first summer there. Every mortgage payment was a victory. Every repair we made ourselves was proof of our commitment. That house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was every sacrifice we'd made, every overtime shift George worked, every summer I spent tutoring instead of resting. It was ours, paid for in sweat and love and decades of putting each other first. We had one child, our son Nathan. He came after 5 years of trying, of disappointments and prayers, and finally a miracle. We poured everything we had into raising him right. George taught him to fish in the creek behind our house, to change a tire, to look people in the eye when he shook their hand, to keep his word no matter what. I taught him to read before kindergarten, sitting with him every evening with picture books until the words made sense. I taught him to love music, to appreciate the small beauties in life, to call his mother every Sunday no matter how busy he got. He grew into a good man, I thought. Gentle like his father, with George's patient brown eyes and steady hands. Kind-hearted, soft-spoken. The type of person who'd stop to help a stranger change a flat tire. When he brought Sophia home 8 years ago and told us they were getting married, I saw how his face lit up when he looked at her. That was enough for me. If Nathan loved her, I would love her too. Sophia was beautiful in that careful, constructed way that takes effort to maintain. Always perfectly dressed, makeup flawless, hair smoothed into place without a strand out of line. She smiled at all the right moments during family dinners, laughed at George's corny jokes, complimented my cooking. But there was something in her eyes I couldn't quite name then, a constant measuring, as if she were always calculating her worth against everyone around her. I told myself I was being unfair, projecting my own insecurities onto this young woman who would become my daughter-in-law. Their wedding was lovely, held in a hotel ballroom that cost more than George and I had spent on our entire wedding and honeymoon combined. Sophia's parents paid for most of it, thank goodness, though Nathan insisted on contributing what he could. I watched my son stand at that altar in his rented tuxedo, promising to love and cherish this woman, and I felt the bittersweet ache every mother feels when her child begins their own life. Pride mixed with loss. Joy shadowed by the knowledge that I was no longer the most important woman in his world. George died 7 years ago this October. The doctor said it was a massive heart attack, that he wouldn't have felt much pain, that it happened so quickly there was nothing anyone could have done. He was in the backyard tending his tomato plants on a Saturday morning, humming "Fly Me to the Moon," the way he always did when he was content. I was inside making lemonade. When I came out to call him for lunch, he was lying in the dirt beside his beloved tomatoes, already gone. The world becomes very quiet when your heart breaks completely. I stood there on that lawn surrounded by the scattered pieces of my life, And the strangest thing happened. I stopped crying. The tears that had been streaming down my face simply dried up, as if my body had decided there was no point in weeping anymore. Some sorrows run too deep for tears. I bent down slowly, my knees protesting the way they always did these days, and picked up what was left of my mother's teacup. Just the handle remained intact, still painted with those delicate pink roses she'd loved so much. She'd given me that cup on my wedding day, told me it had survived the Depression and the war and her own mother's hard life before that. Strong women pass down strong things, she'd said. I closed my fingers around that broken handle and felt the weight of generations of strong women who'd come before me, who'd survived worse than this. I had to believe I could survive it too. The neighbors were starting to peek out from behind their curtains. I could feel their eyes on me, their pity and curiosity mixing together in that uncomfortable way people have when they witness someone else's humiliation. Mrs. Chun from next door started to come out, her hand raised as if to help, but I shook my head. I couldn't bear kindness right then. Kindness would have shattered whatever fragile composure I was holding together. I gathered what I could carry, some clothes, a few photographs that hadn't been too damaged, George's reading glasses even though no one would ever wear them again. I left the broken china, the shattered picture frames, the ruined keepsakes scattered across the grass. They could stay there as evidence of what had happened, though I doubted Sophia would feel any shame about it. As I walked away from the house George and I had built together, I let myself remember how I'd gotten to this moment. Not the big moments but the small ones. The tiny erosions of dignity that I'd convinced myself didn't matter. It had started so gradually I hadn't even noticed at first. That first year they lived with me, things were warm enough. Sophia was grateful, or at least she pretended to be. She'd thank me for watching the children, for cooking dinner, for paying the bills. Nathan would hug me goodnight and tell me how much they appreciated everything I was doing. I felt needed, useful. Like I had purpose again after George's death had left me feeling so hollow. But somewhere in the second year, the gratitude started to fade. Sophia stopped saying thank you when I did the laundry or cleaned up after dinner. She started making little comments about how I organized the kitchen, how I dressed, how I interacted with the children. Eleanor, don't give Lily so much sugar. Eleanor, you're holding Ethan wrong. Eleanor, that outfit is a bit much for a woman your age, don't you think? Always said with a smile, always framed as helpful suggestions, but the message underneath was clear. I was doing things wrong. I was too much. I was in the way. By the third year, I'd been moved out of the guest room and into the attic. Sophia was pregnant again. A pregnancy that ended in a miscarriage at 12 weeks, and she needed the guest room for a home office where she could work on starting an online business that never quite materialized. The attic was unfinished, hot in summer and freezing in winter. I had to duck under the slanted ceiling to avoid hitting my head. My bed was a twin mattress on the floor. My clothes hung on a rack George had used for storage. But I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they needed the space more than I did. I started eating dinner alone up there most nights. Sophia said the children needed a consistent routine, and my teaching schedule didn't align with their dinner time. It made sense, she explained. Why make 2 dinners? I could eat leftovers after they were done. So I'd sit on that twin mattress with a plate of cold pasta or reheated chicken, listening to my family laugh together in the dining room below. And I'd convince myself this was just how families worked when space was tight. The rules around the children got stricter too. I couldn't give them gifts without asking Sophia first. I learned this the hard way when I bought Lily an expensive bicycle for her 8th birthday. A beautiful purple one with streamers on the handlebars and a basket on the front. I'd saved for 3 months to afford it, skipping my own small luxuries, going without new shoes even though mine were worn through at the heels. I wanted to see Lily's face light up the way children's faces should on their birthdays. Sophia made me return it the next day. She said I was undermining her parenting, spoiling the children, making them think money grew on trees. She stood in my attic room with her arms crossed and watched while I called the store to arrange the return. Nathan was somewhere downstairs, conveniently absent as always. I never saw where the refund money went, though I'd paid for it with my own pension check. That was 3 days before I bought the lottery ticket. I'd gone to return the bicycle, my heart heavy with disappointment and shame, and on the way home I stopped at the corner store where I'd been buying lottery tickets for 20 years. It was something George and I had done together every week. Our little ritual, our impossible dream. We'd use the same numbers every time. Our birthdays, our anniversary, Nathan's birthday. After George died, I kept playing those numbers, kept buying one ticket a week. It made me feel close to him somehow, like we were still dreaming together. That evening, heartbroken over the bicycle and everything it represented, I bought my ticket from Mr. Park like I always did. But this time I remembered something George used to say. Always sign the back right away, Ellie. That's how you prove it's yours. So I did. I pulled out my pen and wrote my name, Eleanor Hayes, clearly on the back just like George had taught me. Then I tucked it in my purse with the receipt and went home to my attic room. I never imagined that simple signature would change everything. I left the lottery ticket on the kitchen table that night. I don't know why, really. Maybe I was too tired to take it upstairs to my attic room. Maybe some part of me, exhausted from years of invisibility, wanted to be seen. Or maybe it was just carelessness, the kind that comes from being so worn down you stop thinking clearly about anything at all. Sophia found it the next morning, while I was at school teaching my second graders their spelling words. I learned later from Mrs. Chun, who heard the screaming from next door, that Sophia had been clearing breakfast dishes when she spotted that little slip of paper on the table. She'd picked it up, checked the numbers against her phone, and then checked again because surely she'd made a mistake. But she hadn't made a mistake. The ticket I'd bought with my pension money, using the birthday numbers George and I had played for 20 years, was worth $85 million. Mrs. Chun said the shrieking started around 9 in the morning. Sophia had called Nathan home from work immediately, and by the time I returned from school at 4 o'clock, there were champagne bottles on the counter, expensive ones they'd sent Nathan out to buy on credit, and Sophia was on the phone with what sounded like every person she'd ever known, announcing their incredible fortune. I walked into my own kitchen to find it transformed into a celebration I hadn't been invited to. Lily and Ethan were running around with chocolate cake smeared on their faces, cake I certainly hadn't bought and couldn't afford. Sophia was wearing a silk blouse I'd never seen before, tags still dangling from the sleeve. Nathan had his laptop open, scrolling through luxury real estate listings with a dazed expression on his face. When Sophia saw me, her eyes were wild with a kind of manic joy I'd never witnessed before. She held up the lottery ticket, my lottery ticket, and announced that they were millionaires, that everything was going to change, that they'd never have to worry about money again. She talked about the mansion they'd buy, the cars, the vacations to Europe and Asia, and everywhere she'd always dreamed of going. I stood there in my worn teaching clothes, my sensible shoes with the hole in the left sole, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. I asked her quietly if she'd looked at the back of the ticket. Had she seen the signature there? She waved her hand dismissively, drunk on champagne and possibilities. Of course she hadn't looked at the back. Why would she? The ticket was in their house on their kitchen table. Obviously it belonged to them. She said this while standing in the house my late husband and I had bought 40 years ago, the house I'd been paying for alone since George died, the house where I'd been relegated to an attic room like some character from a Victorian novel. I didn't argue with her that evening. I was too stunned, too exhausted from a day of teaching, too overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. I climbed up to my attic room and lay on my thin mattress, staring at the slanted ceiling, while below me the celebration continued late into the night. I should have said something then. I should have stood up for myself, produced my receipt, explained that I'd bought that ticket with my own money. But 7 years of being diminished had taught me to stay small, stay quiet, avoid confrontation. And there was a part of me, a part I'm ashamed to admit existed, that wanted to see how far they would go. How much they would reveal about who they really were when they thought they had everything. The next morning, that's when it happened. The scene I opened this story with, the moment that's burned into my memory like a brand. Sophia woke up intoxicated by visions of wealth, and I suppose in her champagne-soaked mind, she'd been doing charity work all these years by allowing me to live in my own home. The old woman who paid all the bills, who raised their children, who gave up every comfort so they could have what they needed, I was dead weight now. An embarrassment. A reminder of poverty they were desperate to leave behind. She started throwing my belongings out the window around 8 in the morning. I'd been downstairs making breakfast. Habit dies hard. When I heard the crash of something hitting the ground outside, I rushed to the front door and saw my mother's china scattered across the concrete. Before I could process what was happening, more items came raining down. My clothes, my books, my photographs, everything I owned in this world tossed out like garbage. And then Sophia appeared in that window, her face twisted with a cruelty I'd only glimpsed in fragments before, and she screamed those words that will echo in my mind until the day I die. We don't need to do charity for you anymore, old woman. Go die in a nursing home where you belong. Nathan stood behind her. My son, my miracle baby, the child I'd raised to be kind and good and strong. He stood there and watched. He didn't throw anything himself, I'll give him that small mercy. But he didn't stop her either. He didn't defend me. He didn't remind his wife that this was my house, my home. The place his father and I had built together with our bare hands and broken backs. His silence hurt worse than Sophia's words. I gathered what I could from the lawn, my hands shaking so badly I dropped things twice, 3 times before I could hold them. The broken teacup handle, George's glasses, a few photographs that hadn't been destroyed. And then, with my last shred of dignity wrapped around me like armor, I asked Sophia one more time. Had she read the name on the back of that ticket? I saw doubt flicker across her face for just a moment. But then it was gone, drowned in champagne confidence and the intoxicating drug of imagined wealth. She laughed at me. Actually laughed. Then she slammed the window shut. I walked away from my home with one small suitcase of salvaged belongings and $47 in my purse. I had nowhere to go. My teaching salary went to that mortgage, those bills, that family that had just thrown me away. I had no savings because every penny I'd earned had gone to keeping them comfortable. I ended up at Betty's Diner on Market Street, the place where George and I used to have coffee on Saturday mornings. Betty took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. She just handed me a menu and a glass of water, and let me sit in a back booth for 3 hours while I figured out what to do. She had a tiny room above the diner that she sometimes rented to people down on their luck. One room barely bigger than a closet, with a hot plate and a bathroom down the hall that I'd share with 2 other tenants. The wallpaper was peeling, the floorboards creaked, and the window looked out onto a brick wall. Cost $200 a month, money I didn't have. Betty told me I could work it off washing dishes in the evening after my teaching job. She said this casually, like it was no big deal, like she couldn't see how close I was to breaking into pieces right there on her worn linoleum floor. I moved in that afternoon. Everything I owned fit into that one suitcase and a paper bag Betty gave me for the broken pieces I couldn't bear to leave behind. Meanwhile, across town in the home I'd lost, Sophia and Nathan were spending money they didn't have yet. They bought 2 brand new luxury cars on credit that same day. They put a deposit on a mansion in the historic district, $150,000 they borrowed against their assumed lottery winnings. They booked first-class tickets to Paris, designer shopping sprees, enrolled the children in the most expensive private school in Charleston. All of it on credit. All of it based on a ticket with someone else's name signed on the back. The lottery commission called me 4 days after I moved into that room above Betty's Diner. I was sitting on the edge of my narrow bed, eating soup straight from the can because I couldn't afford to waste time heating it up before my dishwashing shift, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end had a crisp, professional voice. She introduced herself as Margaret Chun from the South Carolina Education Lottery Claims Department. She asked if I was Eleanor Hayes, if I had purchased a lottery ticket at Park's Corner Store on March 15th at approximately 6:47 in the evening. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I told her yes, that was me. I'd bought that ticket with my pension money, used the same numbers my late husband and I had played for 20 years. There was a pause, and then Miss Chun said something that made the tiny room spin around me. She said someone else had tried to claim my winnings. Someone named Sophia Hayes had appeared at the lottery headquarters that morning with the ticket, insisting it belonged to her, demanding immediate payment of the $85 million prize. But Miss Chun had done what she was supposed to do. She'd checked the signature on the back of the ticket. She'd asked Sophia for identification, for the purchase receipt, for any proof that the ticket was hers. Sophia had none of these things. The signature on the back read Eleanor Hayes in my careful handwriting. The signature that matched my driver's license, my social security records, everything that proved I was who I said I was. Miss Chun had security footage too. Mr. Park's store had cameras, and they showed me clear as day purchasing that ticket, signing it immediately, putting it in my purse with the receipt. Every detail of that transaction was documented, time-stamped, preserved. Sophia had apparently become hysterical when they refused her claim. She'd screamed about marital assets, about how I was just her mentally unstable mother-in-law who lived in their house, about how the ticket had been found on their kitchen table so obviously it belonged to them. She'd threatened lawsuits. She'd called me a thief, said I'd stolen the ticket from her, that I was a confused old woman who didn't know what she was doing. Ms. Chen's voice was gentle when she told me this, as if she understood how much those accusations would hurt. She asked me if I still had my purchase receipt, if I was willing to come to their office to verify my claim, if I understood that the winnings were legally mine and mine alone. I sat there in that peeling wallpaper room, holding my phone with trembling hands, and I thought about George, about how he'd always told me to sign the back, to keep the receipt, to protect what was ours. Even from beyond the grave, he was still taking care of me. I told Miss Chen I'd be there the next morning with my receipt and identification. Then I hung up and cried for the first time since Sophia had thrown my belongings out the window. But these weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were something else entirely. Relief, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding that I didn't have to stay small forever. The next week moved like a dream I couldn't quite believe was real. The lottery commission verified everything, my signature, my receipt, the security footage. Their lawyers reviewed the case thoroughly because Sophia had hired an attorney and was threatening to sue everyone involved. She claimed the ticket was marital property since it had been in the family home. She produced Nathan as a witness who stammered his way through testimony about how I'd been confused lately, forgetful, not quite myself. But the law was clear. The ticket belonged to whoever's name was on it, whoever had purchased it, whoever could prove ownership. That person was me. Only me. Sophia even tried to get a court to declare me mentally incompetent, desperate to get her hands on money that had never been hers. Her lawyer questioned my age, my grief over George, my strange decision to move into a tiny room above a diner. Wasn't that proof I wasn't thinking clearly? The Lottery Commission's attorney shut that down fast. I'd been a teacher for 32 years. I'd managed a household and finances throughout my marriage. I'd maintained my teaching position even while dealing with my family situation. I had bank statements, employment records, references from colleagues. I was far from incompetent. I was simply a woman who'd been exploited by her family and had finally reached her breaking point. The judge ruled in my favor. The winnings were mine, all $85 million before taxes. $51 million after the government took its share. More money than I'd ever imagined having in 10 lifetimes. I didn't tell anyone at first except Betty, who wept with joy for me right there in her diner kitchen. I met with financial advisors, with lawyers, with people who help newly wealthy individuals protect their assets. I set up trusts for Lily and Ethan immediately, funds they'd receive when they turned 25, money Sophia and Nathan couldn't touch, couldn't borrow against, couldn't spend. My grandchildren would have security regardless of what their parents did. That was non-negotiable. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and necessary. I went back to that house, my house, the one I still legally owned since my name was the only one on the deed, and I told Sophia and Nathan exactly what had happened. I didn't go alone. I brought my attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia who had no patience for nonsense. We arrived on a Wednesday afternoon when I knew the children would be at their new expensive private school, the one Sophia had enrolled them in on credit. Nathan answered the door. He looked terrible, pale and drawn, with circles under his eyes that aged him 10 years. Behind him I could see packing boxes everywhere. They were already preparing to move into that mansion they'd put a deposit on, already spending money they'd never actually had. We sat in my old living room, the one where George and I used to watch television together, where I'd rocked baby Nathan to sleep 35 years ago, and Patricia explained the situation in clear legal terms. The lottery winnings belonged to me. All of it. Sophia had no claim, no rights, no access to any of it. Sophia's face went through every stage of grief in 30 seconds. Denial, this couldn't be happening, there must be some mistake. Anger, how dare I steal from them, how dare I ruin everything. Bargaining, surely I'd share with family. Surely I wouldn't leave my own son with nothing. Depression, they'd already spent so much, how would they pay it back, what would people think? And finally, a kind of hollow acceptance that looked more like shock. Nathan just stared at his hands. He didn't look at me once during the entire conversation. I told them about the trusts for Lily and Ethan. I told them those children would be provided for. that they'd have educational funds and security when they came of age. But as for Sophia and Nathan themselves, they'd made their choices. They'd thrown me away like garbage the moment they thought they didn't need me anymore. They'd spent money that wasn't theirs, celebrated a windfall they had no right to claim. I wasn't going to bail them out of the debt they'd created. The cars they'd bought on credit, the mansion deposit, the designer clothes and luxury bookings, those were their responsibility. They'd have to figure it out themselves. Patricia handed them formal eviction papers then. They had 30 days to vacate my house. The house I'd been paying for alone all these years while they lived rent-free. The house they'd reduced me to living in an attic in. That house was mine and they were no longer welcome in it. Sophia finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage and desperation. She said I was cruel, heartless, that I was punishing them for one mistake. She said Nathan was my son, that family was supposed to help each other. I stood up from my chair slowly, feeling every one of my 63 years in my bones but also feeling stronger than I had in 7 years. I looked at Sophia, then at my son who still wouldn't meet my eyes, and I said something I'd needed to say for so long. I told them I had helped. For 7 years I'd given them everything, my home, my money, my time, my dignity. I'd loved them unconditionally, while they treated me like an inconvenience to be tolerated. The moment they thought they had money of their own, they discarded me without a second thought. That wasn't one mistake. That was who they'd chosen to be. We left them sitting in that living room surrounded by boxes packed for a future that would never come. The first thing I did with my winnings was something small, something just for me. I bought a new pair of shoes. Good ones, comfortable ones without holes worn through the soles. I know that sounds silly, a woman with $51 million celebrating a pair of $60 walking shoes, but you have to understand I'd been putting everyone else first for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something new in mine. I wore those shoes out of the store and walked for hours along the Charleston waterfront, just breathing in the salt air and watching the seagulls and feeling the solid ground beneath my feet. For the first time in 7 years, I had nowhere I had to be, no one I had to take care of, nothing I owed to anyone. The freedom of it was almost frightening. Betty's Diner had become my unexpected sanctuary during those first weeks after the truth came out. I kept my room above the diner even though I could have afforded any hotel in the city, any mansion I wanted. There was something healing about that simple space, about Betty's no-nonsense kindness, about the rhythm of the restaurant below with its clinking dishes and coffee-scented air. I wasn't ready yet for anything grand. I needed small and quiet and safe. I did resign from my teaching position, though that decision broke my heart a little. 32 years I'd spent in that classroom, and I'd loved nearly every moment of it. But I was tired, bone tired in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with needing time to heal. The school held a retirement party for me. My fellow teachers brought cake and gave speeches about what a dedicated educator I'd been. Several of them cried. I cried too, but they were good tears this time. I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Morrison was a woman about my age who specialized in helping people recover from family trauma. I'd never thought of what I'd experienced as trauma before. It seemed too dramatic a word for the slow erosion of being made to feel small and unnecessary. But Dr. Morrison helped me understand that abuse doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like being made invisible in your own home. Sometimes it sounds like a daughter-in-law's helpful suggestions that strip away your confidence piece by piece. Sometimes it feels like a son's silence when he should have spoken up. In our sessions, I learned that I'd spent most of my life taking care of others. George, Nathan, my students, my family. And I'd never learned to take care of myself. I believed my worth came from being useful, from being needed. No wonder I'd let myself be treated so poorly. I'd been terrified that if I stopped being useful, I'd stop mattering at all. Dr. Morrison gave me homework. She told me to do one completely selfish thing every day. Something just for my own joy, with no purpose beyond making myself happy. It was harder than it sounds. The first day I sat in my little room for an hour trying to think of something, anything I wanted just for me. Finally, I walked to the bookstore and bought a novel I'd been wanting to read for months, but had never felt I had time for. I read it in one sitting and it felt revolutionary. After that, the selfish things got easier. I joined a watercolor painting class at the community center. I'd always admired art but never thought I had any talent for it. Turns out I was right, I was terrible at painting, but it didn't matter. The feel of the brush in my hand, the way colors bled together on paper, the quiet concentration of trying to capture light and shadow. It all brought me a peace I hadn't known I was missing. I started taking myself to restaurants, nice ones, and ordering whatever I wanted without looking at the prices. I went to the theater, to concerts, to the botanical gardens. I bought fresh flowers every week just to have beauty in my space. I planted herbs on my windowsill and made myself elaborate breakfasts on Sunday mornings. These small acts of self-care felt like tiny rebellions against all those years of making myself smaller. 3 months after claiming my winnings, I started looking for a permanent home. Not a mansion like Sophia had dreamed of, but something that would be mine in a way that felt right. I found a small cottage in Mount Pleasant, right near the water. It had 2 bedrooms, a sunny kitchen, a porch with a view of the marsh, and a garden where I could plant roses. Red roses like the ones George used to bring me every anniversary. The day I closed on that cottage, I stood in the empty living room and cried. But these were different tears than the ones I'd shed on that awful lawn surrounded by my broken belongings. These were tears of gratitude, of disbelief that I'd made it through to the other side, of hope for whatever came next. I furnished the cottage slowly, carefully, choosing each piece with intention. No more hand-me-downs or making do with what I had. I bought a comfortable couch in a soft blue that reminded me of the ocean. I hung artwork that spoke to me. I set up a reading nook by the window where the morning light was perfect. Every choice was mine alone, and that simple fact felt profound. I started a small charity foundation with part of my winnings. I called it the George and Eleanor Hayes Foundation, and its mission was to help elderly parents who'd been exploited or abused by their adult children. I'd learned I wasn't alone in what I'd experienced. There were so many older people trapped in situations where family members took advantage of their generosity, their homes, their savings. My foundation would help them find legal assistance, temporary housing, counseling. It would help them reclaim their dignity the way I'd reclaimed mine. Working with the foundation gave me purpose again, but a different kind than before. This wasn't about making myself useful so others would love me. This was about using my resources and my experience to help people who were suffering the way I had suffered. It felt meaningful in a way that reached deep into my soul. Betty became my closest friend during this time. She'd check on me, bring me soup when I was too absorbed in foundation work to eat properly, sit with me on my new porch and share stories about her own difficult family. She never treated me differently because of the money. To her, I was still just Eleanor, the woman who'd shown up at her diner with a broken heart and a small suitcase. I thought about Lily and Ethan often. I missed them with an ache that never quite went away. But I'd made my choice to protect them through the trusts rather than enabling their parents' dysfunction. Someday when they were older, maybe they'd understand. Maybe they'd seek me out. Until then, I had to trust that I'd done the right thing for their future, even if it meant sacrificing my present with them. Nathan called me once about 4 months after the eviction. His voice on the phone was small, ashamed. He didn't ask for money. He just said he was sorry, that he should have done better, that he was trying to figure out how to be the man his father had raised him to be. I told him I appreciated his apology, but that sorry wasn't enough. Sorry was just a word. Change was action, and until I saw real change, we had nothing more to say to each other. I hung up feeling sad but not guilty. That was progress. A year and a half after that terrible morning on the lawn, I sat on my cottage porch watching the sun set over the marsh, and I realized something extraordinary. I was happy. Not the frantic, desperate kind of happiness that comes from being needed. Not the anxious joy of trying to keep everyone else content. Just simple, quiet, deep down in my bones happiness with my own company and my own life. The roses I'd planted in George's memory were blooming. Red as rubies, just the way he'd liked them. I talked to him sometimes while I tended them, told him about the foundation, about my painting classes, about how I'd finally learned to put myself first. I liked to think he'd be proud of the woman I'd become. Or maybe the woman I'd always been underneath all those years of diminishing myself. Nathan came back into my life that autumn. Not all at once and not on his old terms. He showed up at my cottage on a Tuesday afternoon alone, with divorce papers in his hand and tears on his face. He'd finally left Sophia, he told me. It had taken him losing everything: the house I'd evicted them from, the mansion deposit they'd forfeited, the cars repossessed, the credit destroyed, for him to see who she really was. Or maybe, who he'd allowed himself to become while with her. He didn't ask for money. He'd gotten an apartment, a decent job, was rebuilding from nothing the way I'd had to do. He just wanted to know if there was any possibility of having his mother back in his life. He said he'd spent the last year in therapy, working on understanding how he'd failed me, how his silence had been its own form of cruelty. I let him sit on my porch. I made us both tea. And I told him the truth, that forgiveness wasn't something I could just hand over because he'd finally apologized. Trust was rebuilt slowly through consistent action over time. But I was willing to try if he was. For the grandchildren's sake, yes, but also because underneath all the hurt, he was still my son. Still the boy George and I had raised with so much love. He visits now once a week. Sometimes he brings Lily and Ethan, who've grown so much I barely recognized them at first. He gained primary custody after the court heard testimony about Sophia's behavior, the eviction, the defamation, the attempts to declare me incompetent. The children are in therapy too, working through the chaos their parents' choices had created in their young lives. I see my grandchildren in my home now, where I set boundaries that actually get respected. We bake cookies, read books, walk along the beach collecting shells. Lily asks me about her grandfather George, and I tell her stories about the man who taught me to always sign my name, to protect what's mine, to believe in my own worth. Ethan sits in my lap while I read to him, and sometimes I have to pause because the sweetness of it makes my throat tight with emotion. Sophia appeared on my porch one rainy evening last month. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by consequences she'd finally had to face. She asked if we could talk, said she'd been in therapy, that she understood now how badly she'd treated me. She wanted to make amends, she said. She wanted access to the children. I listened to her, and I heard genuine remorse in her voice. But I also knew that my forgiveness wasn't what she needed most. What she needed was to forgive herself, to do the hard work of becoming someone better. I told her I appreciated her apology, but that any relationship with the grandchildren would be supervised and decided by Nathan and the courts. I gave her the number from my therapist. I wished her well, but I didn't let her back into my life just because she finally said sorry. The foundation is thriving. We've helped 43 families so far. Elderly parents who were exploited, grandparents who lost their homes, retirees who were financially abused. Each person we help feels like a small victory, like turning my pain into something purposeful. I still have my room above Betty's diner too. I haven't rented it out. Sometimes I go there and sit in that tiny space where I learned to survive on my own, just to remind myself how far I've come. Betty laughs at me for keeping it, but I think she understands. That room represents my rock bottom and my rising up all at once. I'm 65 now. My hair is completely gray, my hands have age spots I didn't have before. My knees protest stairs more than they used to. But I've never felt younger, freer, more fully alive. I wake up in my cottage each morning knowing that everything in my life is mine by choice, not by obligation. I spend my days how I want to spend them. I say yes when I mean yes and no when I mean no. I've learned that love without respect isn't love at all, and that teaching people how to treat you sometimes means walking away until they learn. That lottery ticket didn't just win me money. The signature on the back, written in my own hand, claiming what was rightfully mine, won me something far more valuable. It won me myself back. And no amount of money in the world could be worth more than that. I stand on my porch now as the stars come out over the marsh, and I think about that woman who stood on a lawn covered in broken heirlooms, wondering if she'd survive the heartbreak. I want to reach back through time and tell her, you will not just survive. You will bloom. Like these red roses, like the life you'll build. Like the strength you never knew you had. You will bloom in ways you never imagined possible. And the most beautiful part? It's never too late. Not at 63, not at 65, not ever. As long as you're breathing, you can choose to stop being small. You can choose to sign your name and claim what's yours. You can choose yourself. That's what I learned. And that, dear listener, is why I wanted to share my story with you today.